Sure. Okay. All right, and we are going live here, and we'll wait a few seconds here, as we said, for the audience to start filtering in. If you are watching this on the replay, obviously welcome to you too. We're glad you found this video, and there are more of these. If you're interested in these, check out our Facebook page and YouTube to see some of the earlier programs we did, but we're happy to have you watching here as well. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. So welcome everybody who is watching live as well. This is the fourth installment of our online wargaming program. My name is Rob Doan. I'm the curator for the Naval War College Museum. We started this program last year as a way to try and share a little bit more about what we do at the War College and share a little bit about what we have in our museum in kind of a new, fun way. It began obviously when we were shut down during COVID. We are very excited to be able to say that we are going to be reopening to the public, not this upcoming Monday, but the next Monday, June 14th. But this program has proven popular enough, we thought that it's probably worthwhile to keep doing it. So as I said, this is our fourth one, and we're playing tonight. This is kind of part of our observance of the 79th anniversary of the Battle of Midway. And that's what the game is going to be about here tonight, and focusing on the battle that many historians consider to be the most crucial battle in the Pacific in World War II. So I'm joined by a few guests here tonight. I want to go through and introduce very quickly who we have playing. So I'll start out first of all with my opponent, who is Jared Galloway. He is not a Japanese admiral, as his avatar might indicate there, but he is in fact a museum technician who works for the National Naval Aviation Museum down in Pensacola. So welcome, Jared, and thank you for taking me on tonight.
My pleasure, Rob.
All right. We also have joining us also from the National Naval Aviation Museum is Mark Levitt, who is the archivist down there. I'm happy to have you, Mark, too. And Mark is going to be sharing with us a little bit about what they do at their museum, as well as some of the cool artifacts that they have. And they have some great stuff related to Midway. So looking forward to seeing that, too.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you.
And then finally, we are really happy to have along one of our historians who works at Naval History and Heritage Command in Washington, D.C., got Mr. Guy Nasuti, who is a historian in the sorry, I should get it right, the Public Outreach Branch, or the Public Historians Branch. Is that right, Guy?
Public History and Education Branch.
Great. Yeah, well, no, we're really happy to have you, too. We, I should say, we all work for Naval History and Heritage Command in one element or another. Jared, myself, and Mark are in the museum branch, guys with the historians branch. But we're really happy to have this kind of team together here to have the whole elements of the enterprise working together. So it should be fun. So the game that we're going to play here tonight, as said, is the Battle of Midway. We're going to play for probably about an hour or so. You'll see kind of how this game works when we get into it. But before we get into the game itself, we do want to give kind of just a quick historical background to kind of cover some of the events leading up to the battle and set the stage for what you're going to see in this game. So what I'd like to do is hand it over to Guy at this point, who is going to give us that historical sketch, talk about kind of some of the strategic considerations that led both sides to get to this point in the war and what led up to the Battle of Midway. So with that, I will hand it over to Guy.
All right. Thank you, Rob. And good evening, everybody. So as we all know, on December 7th, 1941, Japan staged an attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, severely damaging the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Days later, after the U.S. had declared war on Japan, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. So America found itself in a global war. Japan had launched a relentless assault, sweeping through other U.S. territories. They had taken Guam days later, and the Philippines, as well as British-controlled Hong Kong, Malaya, and Burma. Yet with much of the U.S. fleet destroyed and the nation completely unprepared for war, America and her allies decided they needed to save Great Britain first and defeat Germany before they could turn their full power into the Pacific. The Japanese, meanwhile, sought to complete what they had begun at Pearl Harbor. They aimed to destroy the U.S. carrier fleet in a decisive battle. hoping that the U.S. Would negotiate for peace. So with U.S. battleship fleet crippled in Hawaii, the Navy turned to two surviving assets. Both aircraft carriers and submarines began to mount a serious challenge to Japan's triumphant wave across the Central and South Pacific. But as U.S. attacks on the Japanese naval forces and merchant ships escalated in time from isolated raids to full-scale battles, the learning curves really were beginning to prove both costly and deadly. So throughout the winter and spring of 1942, the war news reaching the U.S. from the Pacific was grim. The Japanese had amassed a vast new empire with a defensive perimeter ranging from western Alaska to the Solomon Islands. In the Southwest Pacific, Japan was beginning to threaten American supply lines to Australia, complicating U.S. plans to use Australia as a staging ground for offensive action. So with the U.S. battle fleet still recovering from the damage of the Pearl Harbor attack, it was left to the supporting fleet to take the fight to the enemy. So not one battleship engaged in any of these early Pacific raids, which were a combination of carrier attacks and bombardments, mostly from cruisers. Through the course of these actions, the U.S. was on the attack for the first time in the war. The victories were not in themselves momentous, and the losses were slight, but these raids were the first steps in the rise of the aircraft carrier as the new ship of the line, replacing battleships. So at this point, U.S. Navy air and shore bombardment attacks against Japanese-occupied territory began less than 2 months after Pearl Harbor. So on February 1st, 1942, the air groups of Enterprise and Yorktown, as well as two surface groups, attacked targets in the Marshall and Gilbert Islands. In order to check the Japanese advances in both New Guinea and New Britain, and also to cover the movements of seaborne U.S. reinforcements that were coming into the area of operations. Japanese bases at Lae and Salamaua, both in New Guinea, were attacked on March 10th. These air raids met little resistance and also marked the first time that two U.S. Navy carrier battle groups performed in a coordinated operation. These small raids set the tone for larger actions against the Japanese as the U.S. and its allies in Australia and New Zealand first blunted Japan's advance. In May 1942, U.S. and Japanese carriers fought the first air-naval battle in history at the Battle of the Coral Sea. Now, during the battle, the Americans lost carrier Lexington, and the Japanese, although they didn't lose any of their fleet carriers, they did lose a smaller carrier. And it was the heavy damage that Shikaku had suffered during the battle that sent her back to Japan for repairs. Zoikaku lost half of her air group at Coral Sea, and she was forced to wait for a replacement group that could come aboard. It was after the Doolittle raid on April 18th, 1942, that saw Admiral Yamamoto push forward with his plans for the invasion of Midway. His intent was to draw out the U.S. carriers and destroy them in the decisive battle. The perception of the Imperial Japanese Navy leading up to Midway was one of a near unstoppable force. It was at Midway that the Japanese were ultimately stopped and the tide of the war began to turn.
All right. Thank you very much, Guy.
Sure.
All right. So that brings us up to the starting point for our game, the battle itself. And I'm going to switch over to Jared's screen. So to give you an idea of what's going on here for tonight, so first of all, I'll be playing the U.S. side, and Jared is going to be playing the Japanese side. Our game, so this is a game that's actually available on Steam if you want to look for it at some point. It's a free download, so it doesn't cost anything. It's called Order of Battle, but we're using that to refight Midway here tonight. The game is going to begin on the beginning of June 3rd, so the day that the Japanese fleet was first spotted. Our first few turns are probably going to be mostly trying to find each other, and we'll see what happens from there. The neat thing that I'll say, just so you know what you're looking at before we get into this, as you, the audience, watch this, you'll see, and when it's Jared's turn, you'll see everything that he can see on his screen, and when it's my turn, you'll see everything I can see. The thing to keep in mind is that when I'm moving as the U.S. player, I don't get to see everything on the map. I don't know where Jared's ships and aircraft are until I've actually spotted them. You all will get to see that when you're watching a move, but I won't. So you in the audience are going to know much more about what's going on than either Jared or I do until our fleets actually make contact. So it's going to be interesting to see how this develops. We are not, Jared and I have both agreed, we are under no compunction to fight as they did historically. We are free to use a different plan, try things differently. Certainly the Japanese, with the multiple groups they were bringing in together here, it could have gone a number of different ways than it actually did. So we both have some interesting options. So as we play, we'll probably talk about the historical events of the battle and how that relates to what's going on in the game, how it's different, how it might be the same. We'll pause here and there maybe to do some quick artifact spotlights. I know Mark wants to show a few things from his museum. I've got 1 or 2 artifacts to show as well. So we'll be cutting in and out as we go to do that. So Jared, I've got it on your screen so we can see the map here was there right on Midway. From this point on, I'm gonna not look at the screen too much because I don't want to see what I'm not supposed to see, but what I need to find out and discover through the units here. But the map starts out on Midway, so you can see kind of what we're fighting over here. So the primary objective, of course, for both sides here is for Jared, it's to invade Midway and get all 3 of those hexes that you can see here that make up the Midway Island. For me, of course, it's to prevent that from happening. And we have a few secondary objectives too. Jared is going to try to sink at least 3 aircraft carriers, right? All 3 that are present for the U.S. My secondary objective is sinking at least 1 of his. So maybe a little bit easier historically than the 4 that went down in reality. But those are secondary. The primary objective, of course, is Midway Island itself. So Jared, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. And if you want to kind of show people, we've already done our setups here. There's a free setup. So Jared, if you want to show people, and keeping in mind that I'm listening, so don't talk too specifically about what you're doing, but if you want to at least show people how you have things set up here, and then we can start moving away.
All right. Well, as Rob said, the objective for the Japanese is to actually occupy Midway. And if I don't do that, even if I sink the entire American task force, I will lose the game at the end of my 16th turn. So that has kind of influenced how I've deployed my ships. You can see what I've done, and this is sort of in a very general sense like what the Japanese did, but when you get into specifics, it's very different. And this is all based on the fact that these transports take, I think, optimally 11 to 12 moves to get across the map. Another turn is to unload, and then if only one of them gets there, that's at least 2 more turns to occupy all of Midway. So that's why these ships are in these really screwy formations. And I think by turn 3, I'll be able to have them in something that looks a little more realistic. This group up here is probably going to look really weird to people, and I think people who have studied the Pacific War can kind of get an idea of what I'm doing here. I've given people kind of an Easter egg that relates to that. And I'm going to start by moving this first force. Like I said, trying to get it into a And like I said, I have about, I think 3 turns to get them in a good formation. And then maybe...
I want to say you might want to turn down the sound on your computer because they got a little bit of the sound effects coming through.
Okay. Try and see if
As cool as
that makes it an immersive experience, Rob. Come on.
it does, I know it's kind of a neat effect, but we did find out in past programs that it interferes a little bit with our voices. So, well, everybody watching at home, you just have to make the aircraft and ship sounds on your own. Add your own sound effects.
the problem there, Rob, is if I turn everything off, I think it'll kick me out of the game.
Okay.
Oh wait, I know what I can do. I can hook up the headphones.
Okay.
Sorry about that, everybody. All right, so now you shouldn't be able to hear anything.
Okay. Awesome.
And like I said, I'm really sort of constrained by pretty much having to move the transports every turn to have any chance of getting them in range of Midway. So I'm not just doing that out of recklessness. It's sort of a necessity.
Yeah, it's a good point. There are, with any game like this, there are some artificial constraints that the actual participants didn't have. One of them is certainly the limited time of the game. When we have 16 turns, there was no no necessity for the battle to end on June 7th, which is the end date in our game here for this scenario, of course. And another limitation is the map. I mean, we are working. The map can't cover the entire Pacific Ocean. Obviously, there's limits to that. So we're working within a more confined space than they were, which limits some of the areas we have to search and find each other. So Jared, as the player who I know you want to remain undetected for as long as possible. Well, of course, I do too with my carriers, but it probably affects you more in the fact that, you have less ocean area to hide in than the actual Japanese fleet did.
Yeah, now, one thing that Rob did to sort of help me out is that he removed the radar station that historically was on Midway that had a range of about 150 miles. Previously, that was on there, but he had to get rid of it to give me a place to land. So I do have kind of an advantage in that sense that the Japanese didn't have. This particular group, like I said, is probably going to be really confusing to people. And again, like I said, there's an Easter egg that I've given for what exactly it's doing. Because Rob can hear what I'm saying, I can't really, explain what it is, but hopefully some of you can kind of figure it out.
Now I'm intrigued. I wonder what I'm going to find.
And let's see, I've got 2 submarines on the board, and there are a few different things you can do with these. You can use them to actively search for enemy ships. You can use them for a passive search, where you just send them to areas making sure the Americans don't go there. And there are other things you can do with them. And I think it'll become clear pretty early which of those tactics I'm using.
Yeah, that submarine screen is an important thing for both of us. And I'm sure, Jared, as you know, having read so much about it, the Japanese plan definitely included this element of the submarine screen that would precede the main clash between the fleets, as kind of was the plan at the start of the war, and almost the larger strategic planning that guided the war. The Japanese thought always was that they wanted to send out submarines and aircraft to try and attrit the U.S. fleet before the main climactic clash, and that is all kind of illustrated perfectly at the Battle of Midway. It's a great kind of example of them doing just that, of sending out this submarine screen. In the actual battle, they didn't quite get into position soon enough was the problem. They get up there where they wanted to get, and were not able to, get a shot at a carrier or a capital ship or something like that. So Jared has 2 of them here. They had more than that in reality, but we've tried to, again, kind of compress things a little bit to deal with the limited space of the game map, but still give the idea of what could have happened.
All right, and with that, I'll throw it back to you, Rob.
All right. So we're gonna switch screens over here. And take a few seconds here for it to load up on my side. So I'm getting onto my part of that turn. And for everybody who's watching, of course, we encourage a lot of interaction here too. So as you're watching, if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the comments. If you have comments, suggestions for strategy, what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, if you'd like to try and tell us what you think we should do, please feel free to type that in. We love to get suggestions like that. So I'm gonna click through. This is showing me a replay. This is basically a replay of what just happened on Jared's turn, and whenever I've spotted something, it's going to give me that replay of it here. So it looks like one of my very forward submarines has spotted an aircraft in the air. So we do have our first spotting of one. Looks like a 0 up there. So we've got something on the map here already. But I'm going to zoom out a little bit and go back here just for reference. So again, here's Midway. This is in the middle of the map. I'm going to come over to my side of the map, and you can see kind of how I am starting things. So I'm going to go up here first. There's a group of ships in this corner, and scrolling down a little bit, we've got a few different groups. I guess we might call them task forces, but they're arranged like so. We've got this grouping here. You can kind of see what kinds of ships those are. And then coming further down to the very this part of the map, you can see what we've got over here. So that was as generic a description as I can give to not give away too much to Jared. But hopefully looking at that, you see kind of what the American setup is and what might be shaping up here. So there's that setup. So I'm going to go ahead and start moving. Let me start back up in this direction. Definitely for me. Oh, sorry.
I did promise Rob that I wouldn't text Jared any intelligence I found from watching his screen. So.
Yeah, you and Guy, like the rest of the audience, will know exactly what's going on both sides here, but it's for us to figure out. I know for me, the first few turns here are all about, I definitely want to spot those, the aircraft carriers as soon as I possibly can. That's got to be the top priority for me. The longer that goes where I don't know where they are, only bad things can happen for me, that's for sure. So I'm going to move this group up here. I definitely have some search aircraft at my disposal that are going to help with that. So I'm going to move some of these things out here, and I'm going to get some aircraft up in the air. And coming down here. Once I've got all the ships moved, I'm going to come over to Midway itself. As you know, if you have read much about the battle, the island of Midway itself, the American commander, so Nimitz, of course, is in charge of the overall operation here. Admiral Jack Fletcher is the one who has tactical command of the battle. But for Nimitz especially, they considered the island of Midway, which I'm scrolling back to here, to be really a fourth American aircraft carrier, an unsinkable aircraft carrier, which was the best kind, although, of course, it was also unmaneuverable. But it had a lot of advantages in the fact that because they only had 3 aircraft carriers and they were expecting Japan to bring 4 into the battle, they brought 6 in reality. But even if it had met expectations, they still thought they would be outnumbered. So Midway itself represented a way to kind of even those odds a little bit. in terms of aircraft, it was much a better situation, and the Americans actually had a bit of an advantage in terms of overall numbers of aircraft. But here on Midway are these valuable search planes I've got. So here's a PBY Catalina, which I'm going to fly out here and get going in the direction I assume the Japanese are probably coming from. I've also got some Army Air Force bombers that played an important role in the battle, although they didn't cause much damage, but they did sight the Japanese fleet early on, and I'm going to see if I might have the same kind of luck with them. So I'm going to get them up in the air, and at this point, let's see. The only thing left for me are my submarines. For me, these are pretty much valuable spotting tools as well, so I'm coming along here, and see, I've got something popping up on my screen already. The difficult thing with, oh, there we go. Okay, now I've got something. With the submarines, the constraining factor for them is just how few turns they can really spend underwater. World War II submarines are not like submarines today, where they could go out for 6 months and stay underwater. These submarines are very, very limited in how much time they can spend underwater. So they really are much more like surface torpedo craft that can submerge for short periods of time. So I'm going to try and stay on the surface and not dive unless I absolutely have to. All right, so I'm zooming out here to kind of show, again, here's Midway in the middle. Here's where I am. I don't know what's out here yet, although I've just found something. I've definitely got part of the Japanese fleet. I'm glad I'm starting to see something, but I don't see carriers yet. So that's something I've got to work on. All right, I'm going to end my turn and send it back over to you, Jared. Mark, I was going to ask you, I know I was saying a little bit about Art Museum and the fact that we're opening up to the public again. Do you want to, Mark, just say real quickly a little bit about what the National Naval Aviation Museum is all about, in terms, and talk about visitation, if you're open yet, kind of let people know what's going on in your end of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're down south here in the panhandle of Florida. So that's really sort of southern Alabama, if you can picture the U.S. map. And we're aboard NAS, Naval Air Station Pensacola. So we're aboard an active military base. And with COVID and some other security issues, we are currently only open to active duty, retired, and certain other veteran affair folks that have the proper ID. And that's based off the NAS Pensacola base access policies. Not the museum doesn't have any authority to change that or anything like that. Now, those folks that have the DoD ID are able to bring guests, including the public, as long as they have a normal ID that gets them on. It's called the Trusted Traveler Program. But yeah, as you can imagine, from the before times, before COVID, we're down quite a bit on our visitation. But we are seeing quite a few folks that come through. And our museum's large. It's the largest in the sister museums under NHHC, our Naval History and Heritage Command. We're over 350,000 square feet, and we celebrate 100 years, over 100 years of U.S. naval aviation. We're also home to the Navy's Demonstration Flight Squadron, so also known as the Blue Angels. So they practice here on the flight line right behind our museum 2 to 3 times a week. And visitors are able to freely go and watch, which is basically a free air show 2 to 3 times a week. So it's obviously very popular with the locals and anyone who's a tourist coming through. We used to have almost 750,000 visitors in the last couple of years before COVID. So we're hoping to sort of get our waiver, a public waiver, so the public can go back on themselves and actually start visiting again. And I'll stop there for now because I see there's some action going on.
All right, so we've spotted one of Rob's submarines.
They may have picked a ill-advised time to run on the surface, I guess.
So naturally, I'm going to try to get rid of him right off the bat.
I hate to say it, I guess it sounds a little bit brutal, but I don't know about you, Jared. I consider for purposes of this game, at least I should say, I consider the submarines to be more or less expendable. If they can spot the fleet and I can at least kind of know the overall scheme of what's going on, and even if they're sunk in the process, I feel like they've done their job. So I certainly wouldn't wish that on the submarine crews in reality, but in terms of the game, I'm not going to worry too much if I lose a lot of them.
And my attitude about them is, try to knock them out early so that you're not having to, use turns by ships later on to have to stop to sink them, because that can become an issue with, as you get closer to Midway and you need the movement to close.
Also, considering how horrible American submarine, just torpedoes in general at the time were, I tend to agree with you there, Rob. It's probably not a horrific loss, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's the sad story of American torpedoes at the start of the war, and definitely they're still experiencing that here. Some of the American aircraft that attacked early on in the Battle of Midway, and the devastators that were flying off the carriers, the very few that actually managed to get in range, as people who read about the battle know, in theory, the Americans have a plan to try and get a coordinated airstrike where everything arrives in at the same time. The attack aircraft that they're using are torpedo bombers and dive bombers, and the doctrine pretty much held that ideally you wanted everything to arrive on target at once. And if you had dive bombers coming in from high altitude, torpedo bombers coming in from low altitude, it would be impossible for that target's anti-aircraft defenses to get everything. Most likely they would shoot down some of those aircraft, but there was no way that they could get everything, and some aircraft were bound to get through. As happened in this battle, and as always happens, it rarely goes according to plan, and for a number of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into as we're talking here more, everything did not arrive at the same time. And the story that I think most people are probably familiar with are the torpedo bombers, especially Torpedo Squadron 8 from the Hornet, that was the kind of the first into the battle, and was had to face the brunt of the Japanese combat air patrol all by itself, and were almost all shot down. Well, they were all shot down, and only one person, Ensign George Gay, who is a very famous person to come out of this battle, is also shot down, but he survives and clings to his life raft as he's floating in the water and gets a front row seat to the Battle of Midway for the rest of the next 30 hours about. But those Devastator torpedo aircraft that they were flying at this point were just, they had been a great advancement at the time that they were new in the mid-1930s, but by the time of the Battle of Midway, they were really obsolete and were just old and slow. And on top of all that, guys, you mentioned, even if they could get off a shot, which most of them didn't, but even those that did, the torpedoes that they were using were just not reliable as well. So there are just tons and tons of things that did not go according to plan for them that day.
And Rob, my turn is over.
Yep. All right. I'm switching over to me.
And Rob, I'll just finish while this is loading up. The other thing that the museum does is we have a lot of great relationships with the communities, particularly naval aviation, in a couple of facets. My boss, our historian, Hill Goodspeed, actually teaches the class on naval aviation history to the incoming flight students, most of whom come through Pensacola for some sort of training. And oftentimes he holds this at the museum, so he can take them around and show them the artifacts. He can pull documents and show them as well. And that really gives them a sense, I think, of the heritage and legacy of the community that they're about to join. So that's a great program that he has. We also have more than 300 civilian volunteers that help us run the place. There's only 30 federal employees, and so in order to run a museum this large, we definitely need them. And a lot of those are retired naval aviation personnel who are looking to give back to the Navy at that point in their life as well. Also, finally, we have a rotating core of active duty volunteers for the students that are waiting to class up, or those that are just waiting in between assignments. They can volunteer at the museum in a couple of different capacities. So we get a lot of help, a lot of volunteers from the local community and the base, and we're really appreciative of that as well.
Nice. All right, I've got some more pieces of the puzzle starting to come together here. I'm running into more and more. I mean, one advantage, of course, I have is that I know where Jared is heading. I know he has to get to Midway. So in some respects, I have the advantage of defending where I know he has to go eventually, or at least some of his ships, not all of them, of course. If I want to get at the carriers, I'm assuming they are not necessarily coming to Midway itself. But Guy, one I was going to ask you too, again, because we were just talking about Midway and how it was kind of considered as a fourth aircraft carrier for the Americans. But what would you say, I mean, in terms of like the strategic value of Midway itself, of the base? When the Japanese were putting together their plans for this part of the war, and they had many different invasions they were considering, all happening at the same time, more or less. What was the value of Midway itself in terms of a strategic objective in the war? Was it very valuable, or would you say, I mean, is it just, happened to be in the area that they're fighting around?
No, I think it was very valuable to both the Japanese and the Americans. For the Japanese, Midway definitely served as a defensive buffer from the U.S. Navy. Yamamoto was really, truly shocked by the Doolittle raid and the course that the Americans had taken. They sort of slipped through that the Midway keyhole, as I think he had referred to it. So they were definitely within the defensive perimeter. And although the Doolittle raid did not cause that much damage to the prestige of and the honor, I guess, of Admiral Yamamoto, that really affected him. So he definitely wanted to capture Midway. It was also a launching point to further efforts against Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islands. At that point, the Japanese had conducted some further aerial reconnaissance of the Hawaiian Islands, and they had found that the Americans had really put a lot of work into their defenses. So he was not going to just make another sortie against the islands while it was that well defended. So Midway was a way of sort of keeping the Americans off his back while he could possibly make another assault upon Hawaii. For the Americans, once they had beat the Japanese back, Midway became a halfway point for submarines. So there was the sub base that was created. So the submarines going out on patrol into the Sea of Japan or around the home islands could go back, refuel, rearm, make minor repairs before making the journey back to Pearl Harbor. So it was very important for both belligerents.
Great. Okay. Well, we've got some more sightings to work with here. We've got more aircraft that are in the air here, as you would expect, out there trying to find each other. So I've got some inbound Japanese aircraft, some search planes coming out, and no shooting yet, but I'm assuming things are going to be heating up pretty soon. So that's the end of my turn. We're at the end of turn 2 here, and I'm going to pass it back to Jared.
Rob, did your Catalina spot something?
Yes. Well, it was in the, I don't think it spotted something itself, but it was close enough that we can probably pass it over. Yeah, you have a great artifact related to that, and I want to give you a chance to show that. So yeah, let me, Jared, I'm going to actually switch over to Mark's screen here, and I just want to give him a chance to show this great piece from your collection down there. So here we go.
And if you guys want to do that when I'm actually moving, that might speed the game up a little more for our viewers, and then I can explain what I did after I do it.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay?
Yeah, go ahead and
All
do
right.
that, and you can give a summary when Mark is done. Sure.
Yeah. So this is one of the artifacts. It's a document. So at the museum, we have a curator who handles our actual artifacts. She has about 30,000 micro and macro artifacts. micro meaning smaller than an aircraft, and macro meaning the aircraft. I have about 2 million documents as the archivist, and we work together all the time. A lot of collections are mixed. And this is one of my records. It's a map, as you can see. And this is a map of the Midway Atoll. It shows the eastern and sand islands and the coral reef surrounding them. And you can see some handwritten navigation notes in there. And this was done by Lieutenant Howard P. 80. And he was noting approach distances and landing areas for the PBY Catalina flying boats. Now, as Rob has said, some of you that have maybe read or know about the battle know that early in the morning of June 4th in 42, it was Lieutenant 80 who made the first sighting of the Japanese carriers approaching Midway in one of these PBYs. And he reported, quote, 2 carriers and main body ships, carriers in the front, course 135, speed 35. And this really provided a warning needed to get the American aircraft scrambled to intercept, and 80 and the other PBYs were told to avoid landing at Midway due to the impending attack. This map here that you're looking at was probably made in just a couple of days leading up to the battle, as they were sort of trying to determine where these flying boats could, as I said, safely land and take off. So this is a great piece from somebody who had quite a historic role in the Battle of Midway.
Yeah, that's really cool. These hand-drawn maps are a great piece of history to have there.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, let's go back to Jared. We're back on you.
All right, so I spotted Rob's PBY, which is really good because that's one of the things I want to try to shoot down early. It has poor defensive value, and it can also fly the entire game. So hopefully I can hit it one more time. It's probably going to be a little bit too far away.
I guess it's a good thing you shared that when you did, Mark, because it sounds like my PBY might not be around for too much longer.
Actually, I think he might be okay.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I'm going to be able to get all the way up there to him. One of the disadvantages of this particular scenario, is, as far as the Japanese are concerned, is that even though I have 6 carriers, I really only have a full air group for the 4 fleet carriers. And where that's really an issue is with the fighter cover. I have to be very careful about how I engage with my fighter stream. And just checking to make sure there's not another sub lurking. I haven't really been able to get into the fleet formations that I want to use. I think I have one more turn to try to tighten it up. But basically, to anybody that has read about American anti-aircraft defense during the late stages of World War II, when task forces had large groups of carriers, but then also significant numbers of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, they tended to use the defensive ring with the carriers in the middle. The battleships, which had the heaviest anti-aircraft armament, would usually be on the flanks. And then you'd have cruisers beyond that, and then destroyers on the outer ring for both anti-aircraft defense on the perimeter, but then also, importantly, looking for submarines. So I'm still not seeing a whole lot of aircraft, which isn't really concerning yet. I think I've got maybe one more turn before any of Rob's aircraft, if he deployed them on the far end of his starting zone, will be in position to cross Midway. So I think I'll be okay. I'm kind of amazed this group up here hasn't been seen by anything.
I'm curious, Jared, just because, I mean, again, you don't have to say anything too specific, but in the actual battle, of course, the Japanese have, and several different groups that are all part of this. There's the invasion force itself. There's the kind of advanced screen force that really is more bait to try and, get the Americans to attack it. There's the main carrier force, the Kido Butai, as they called it, with the 4 main fleet carriers. And then there's the main body behind them with the battleships that was really meant to be, deal the finishing blow. I'm not going to ask you if you have exactly that set up, but I'm wondering if I'm assuming what you have may be somewhat different from that. But if you want to talk in very general terms about, are you following more or less that script, or are you throwing the historical plan out the window and grouping your ships differently than they did in reality?
I pretty much threw it out the window, which, like Rob said, he, gave me full permission to do that. Let's see what we got going on here. All right, so there is one of Rob's B-17s. He's got a B-17 and then also, I think, a B-26 from Midway. And I learned from playing a practice round with Mark that the best thing to do is just let them fly around indefinitely, because they can't really hit any ships. They're a very annoying scouting unit because they can stay up the whole game and they have a long range. But trying to shoot them down ends up using fighters. And so in that sense, it's really better to just let them go on and see whatever it is they're going to see.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Those B-17s did spot the advance element of the Japanese fleet on the 3rd, and they certainly tried to attack them. But yeah, as you said, a lot of American air power enthusiasts at that time were really sure that heavy bombers like the B-17 were going to be a great asset in naval battles, and they really thought that they'd be able to. The most extreme, I'd say, advocates even were arguing that the U.S. would not need a navy at some point, that they could rely just on waves and waves of bombers to go out and meet an attacking fleet, and they'd be able to sink it. Midway kind of showed that was not going to be the case, although they did certainly spot the fleet and made an attempt to bomb it. These B-17s did, in fact, attack some of those transports, and then the next day tried to bomb some of the carriers as well. Didn't score a single hit in the entire battle. It's just not what they were made to do. They certainly had an excellent range, could carry a heavy payload, but the targeting technology, the bombing technology, they were meant to be a strategic bomber going after fixed infrastructure. But hitting a maneuvering ship at sea is just an entirely different problem. They didn't have really the aiming technology to do that, and these crews weren't trained to do that either. They had come to Midway here not very long before this battle happened, so they just they really weren't set up for success in that regard, I would say. So they didn't they played a part in the battle, but yeah, did no damage of any kind at all to the Japanese fleet.
Yeah, and in fact, if you're interested in photos of Midway, there's a fairly famous one that's used in multiple publications taken of the Soryu during the B-17 attack early in the battle, and those attacks could pretty much be thwarted just by steaming in a circle, and you can actually see the weight behind the Soryu as it threw the helm over trying to make a circle. And it was even harder for the B-17s because they were carrying extra fuel tanks to extend their range, which meant they didn't have as many bombs to try to put on the target.
Jared mentioned our practice games, and the lesson I learned was that he's going to provide a much better challenge to Rob than I would. So I think we got the split up duties here pretty well done.
Oh, no, Mark, I forgot to tell you, thanks for the text messages about what Rob was doing.
I knew it. Guy, do you think when we were talking about the Army bombers that were involved in this, do you think that's a fair assessment of their worth in the battle? As good search platforms, but much less valuable attack platforms.
Yeah, I'd say that. Yeah, that's very fair. The high altitude bombing at that point, especially on naval ships that are moving and zigging and zagging, through the through the ocean. Yeah, just did not work out well.
So looking at my screen, you can kind of see, again, the major groupings of ships that I have. The Americans, in reality, and I have two carrier task forces together. The Enterprise and Hornet is Task Force 16, and then the Yorktown is 17. The idea was kind of have 16, the two aircraft carriers, Enterprise and Hornet, attack as soon as possible, as soon as the Japanese fleet had been sighted. And Fletcher had wanted to keep the Yorktown in reserve to kind of develop the situation and then attack anything that might have been spotted later on. Until pretty late in the day on the 4th, the American High Command thought that they were only dealing with two carriers. They thought the four carriers that the Japanese were bringing as part of the Kido Butai, the Americans thought that they would be separated into two carrier groups operating separately. They did not really realize till the end of the first day here that in fact, they were all together in one group, but due to clouds getting in the way and search aircraft just not finding them, they didn't really figure that out until much later. So I'm going to be wondering myself how that works out, if I'm going to find all four of them at once, or if I'm going to have to hunt all over the screen and see if I can find some widely dispersed groups here. But I'm looking at the turns here, and it's probably not giving away too much to Jared to let him know that I'm getting more aircraft in the air now, and I got some aircraft warming up their engines on the flight decks here. So the audience can see here kind of what's going on with that. But there are a few more aircraft on Midway itself, which you can see here, that are hanging out on the airstrip on the island. So I've got a few more that are in reserve. There's this one squadron of TBF Avengers, which you can maybe see on my screen there too. That's kind of the torpedo aircraft I know a lot of people think of when they think of World War II in the U.S. Navy especially. Unfortunately, the U.S. in this regard did not have enough of those. They had just been introduced, and then this one squadron had flown in and landed on Midway to be part of the battle. But all the others that are out there on the carriers are still those old Devastator aircraft that did not have a good day for any of them. Let's see.
Rob, at some point I have a good diary entry about what it was like to fly those TBDs.
Ah, great. Okay, maybe as I'm going to cut over to Jared's turn here. So let me end my turn. And yeah, do you want to show your screen? Is that, you got something to show? Great. Okay. Yep, I will put that up for you. Okay. Oh, but you're muted, Mark.
Thank you. That's the catchphrase from 2020 still. You're still muted. All right, there we go. Yeah, so thanks. It was so we have a logbook from one of the aviators, Lieutenant Irvin McPherson, who flew a TBD at Midway. And so it lists, of course, aviator's flight logbook lists all the flights that they take, how long they lasted, what type of mission it was, and sometimes they write notes in them about additional things. Perhaps they had a victory over another aircraft, or if they made bombing runs, or it was night time attack, so on and so forth. And this is part of the uniform that was also donated when we had this logbook donated. Now, the interesting about McPherson was that he actually kept a daily diary of what it was like during the entire war where he was fighting. But of course, for our purposes, there's a selection from when he flew at Midway. And this is what he says about the TBD bombers. We had no illusions about those planes of ours. They are good workhorses or training planes by modern standards, but their lack of speed and lack of armament made them practically worthless, defensively speaking. We knew also that those planes had to be flown down into the most vulnerable positions to make sure of hits. We had to go down inside the Japanese fleet screen, down to between 50 to 60 feet off the water, and slow down to 110 knots to get our torpedoes off successfully. You are a sitter for either a Zero or a well-aimed AA gun under those conditions. And that turned out to be true. obviously, as Rob mentioned, with the losses of so many of the TBDs then. But I figure better than us saying it. Here's somebody who actually flew it during those times. You can hear it straight from the source.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you. All right, Jared, I'll pass it over to you. You want to explain what was going on there while we had our historical aside?
Didn't really do anything. I am, even though Rob asked me not to watch the replays, I am doing that some, just because I noticed that it's very hard to notice certain things happen if you skip the replay. In fact, Rob, I think, missed something on his turn because he's not doing that. That I think could have been useful information.
Well, you're gonna tell me what that was when the game is over. Now I'm worried.
Well, you can always watch the video.
Yeah.
Let's see. Basically, you can see I'm still trying to get rid of this annoying PBY. Just trying to, deny him the ability to use it for intelligence gathering. Now you can see he's got this B-26, which I mentioned is a headache because, like the B-17, it has long range and can provide almost unlimited scouting. But if he flies it in range of my ships that have anti-aircraft defense, I will try to open up on them in those circumstances. I probably won't hit him, but it's at least worth trying. And Rob was talking about the group of Avengers that were on Midway Island. For those of you who aren't aware of that, those guys were actually part of VT-8, the squadron that made the first carrier attack on the Japanese fleet. They had taken delivery of those before the Hornet left Pearl Harbor, but by the time they got there, the Hornet had left. So they flew on to Midway, and George Gay was not, in fact, the only survivor of VT-8 to attack the Japanese fleet. There was another. Just got a message from Mark. My microphone's too loud. Sorry about that. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. My problem is with the setup I'm using, I can't actually hear the volume of my own voice. But like I was saying, there were actually two other survivors of Torpedo 8, Ernest Albert, who was the pilot, and also Harry Ferrier, his radioman, who was badly wounded but survived. And Ferrier, I think, died not too terribly long ago, maybe within the last 3 or 4 years. He was in his late 90s.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jared. I think when I was talking about him, I think I said that George Gay was the only survivor. So yeah, thank you for the correction on that.
Well, it said a lot, not just you.
All right, so I can finally see a little bit of what's going on Midway. Don't want to hang out there too long, though.
And to kind of let people know where we are in the game here, so we're on turn 4. We're still, this is I think the last turn of the first day of June 3rd. So, historically at this point, pretty much all that's happened is that those B-17s had to bomb some transports and miss them. So, I guess more or less true to historical events. We have not had any major exchanges of carrier strikes yet, but we're starting to find each other. So that's. We're about on schedule with that, I would say, in terms of how things progressed in reality.
And Rob had asked me to, try to talk in very general terms about how what I'm doing is either similar to or different from what the Japanese actually did. And I mean, it's obvious to the people watching. It's kind of hard for me to describe it, vocally in a way that's not going to tip Rob off. I will say that it is, at least in a very general sense, sort of similar to what some of the Americans thought the Japanese were doing early on in the battle before they had the complete picture. So maybe that'll give Rob a little bit of a clue. Hopefully not too much of a clue. And again, a lot of this is predicated on having to do certain things that will allow me to close on Midway, even though they're not necessarily historically accurate or something you would really want to do in an actual fleet deployment. But that's just the way it is to give me a chance to actually land on Midway. All right, I'm just going to do a quick check to make sure I've moved everything that needs to be moved. It's telling me I've got things that can attack still. Okay, that's these guys. So let's see if either of them can get a hit on this Marauder. Okay, there's a couple of them. I think I'll hold off on that. Oh, never mind. Accidentally launched one. That's one of the things I haven't quite figured out about this game. Either that or there's some kind of weird delay with the clicking where I'll accidentally surface a submarine when I don't mean to, or launch a plane when I don't mean to. But hopefully this is early enough that won't matter. All right, and back to you, Rob.
All right. I'm looking at our time here. We're just past 9 o'clock. I'm thinking maybe we do one more turn here for tonight, and we'll see how far that gets us. But it sounds like my search aircraft, I'm going to see on the replay here when I just see what happened on what you all have already watched and happened, but I don't know what's happened yet. So I'm going to see what I have in terms of search aircraft that's left. So again, this is just the replay of what you already saw, but I'm just finding out what my units have seen. And now, yeah, I see the B-26. It sounds like you were shooting at here. Oh, my Catalina is just barely hanging on still. I don't think it's going to survive more than one turn. Well, I definitely see some Japanese flat tops there. So even if these search aircraft go down, I at least have got a better intelligence picture now of what I'm facing out there. That is obviously, I mean, one key thing I know we haven't talked about at all is the intelligence aspect of the Battle of Midway, and the fact that, you know, the U.S. had so much of the Japanese plan in its hands already, that Nimitz, thanks to intelligence decrypts and reading the Japanese transmissions and the great work of the cryptanalysts stationed Hypo, especially in Hawaii, that have this very well-known story of decrypting the Japanese communications and figuring out through a number of different ways the basic elements of what the Japanese plan was going to be. They gave Nimitz a really, not perfect, but, you know, very good picture of what the Japanese were bringing to the battle and how they were going to use them. That's one obviously advantage I don't have in this game. I have not been monitoring Jared and Mark's emails to know what they're planning. So that's if Jared has some artificial constraints in terms of the time he has, I guess if there's any disadvantage for me, it's the fact that I don't have quite as good intelligence as perhaps the historical actors did. So, all right, well, I've definitely spotted what I feel like is, we've got at least 2 carriers there, it looks like. I don't think these 2 search aircraft of mine are gonna live much longer, so I think I'm just gonna try to, I've got these symbols over here showing me that something is there, but not clear enough to know what yet. So let me, all right, so I've definitely found a significant grouping. What I'm seeing though are that only 2 aircraft carriers are there. So that leaves many more that I guess that means I have not found yet. This poor PBY, I don't think he's going to get away. I see he's got at least a couple zeros that are attacking him here. So this one number here means he's down to just one strength. So I'm afraid he's probably not going to last another turn. Maybe I'll just try to get away, see if he can get lucky and find something out there. Let's see what else is lurking out here. We haven't really spotted much down in this direction here. I still have some subs running around as well. As I'm moving here, I know, and again, we had talked about their torpedo aircraft so much. So of the American carriers, the Enterprise and the Hornet, both, or I should say the Enterprise and the Yorktown, sorry, both have what I think we would say were pretty good days in terms of the battle. Now, the Yorktown, of course, is sunk at the end of this, so that's a major qualifier. But their air crews do the bulk of the damage to the Japanese fleet. The Hornet, unfortunately, not so much. And again, talking about the torpedo aircraft, the Torpedo Squadron 8 being the first squadron that gets there and has such a horrible experience for a whole variety of reasons. The Hornets air group does not get into the battle. And Guy, I was going to ask you about that a little bit too, if you don't mind. Can you just kind of fill us in a little quickly on, what went wrong with the Hornets air group that day and why they weren't more successful?
Sure. Well, the Hornet hadn't been commissioned until March 42, so just a couple months prior to the battle. So they had to make their way from Norfolk through the Panama Canal and up to Alameda, California. So while they were doing so, their pilots really didn't get that much flight experience while they were, underway. And then, unfortunately, they took on the Doolittle Raiders, and they had to make way for the Mitchells that they had brought on board, and so all their aircraft basically went into the hangar deck. So, once again, they got underway, and their pilots are just not being trained. So on June 4th, they're taking off. It took almost a full hour for them to take off and form up over the carrier before they headed out. The air group commander, Commander Stanhope Ring, takes the air group west, which was not the last sighting of the Japanese fleet. And this is called the Flight to Nowhere. And he stubbornly, for whatever reason, keeps heading due west. It's actually the Lieutenant Commander John Waldron of VT-8. He basically disobeys Ring's order, and he says, "Look, I know where the Japanese ships are, and I'm heading in that direction." So he went off on a different course, and of course the squadron goes with him. Ring continuously keeps flying west. They can hear Waldron and his squadron being decimated when they start to make their attack run, and the Zeros are shooting them down. But this becomes a mystery, and for decades, everybody took Admiral Mitcher's report at face value. None of the other squadron commanders from Hornet submitted an after-action report. So for decades, the Flight to Nowhere was not really well known. It was just taken at face value that Ring and these guys just they had headed out. But the Japanese had changed course and missed them. Hornet's squadrons, especially after VT-8 being completely wiped out, the dive bomber and the fighter squadrons were badly depleted at that point, and not a single aircraft from Hornet scored a single hit on any of the Japanese vessels. So just, yeah, all in all, just a horrible debut for America's newest carrier in the battle.
And it is worth adding to what Mr. Nasuti said, with the Hornets after action report from Mitcher. If you look at the report that Spruance wrote after the battle, he basically, had been very disappointed with some of the things that had happened with the Hornet, including the follow-up, where they had apparently sent some SBDs to attack the Japanese cruisers that had been caught off Midway trying to do a short bombardment. And some of them had taken off with 1,000-pound bombs, even though he had specifically ordered for them to use 500-pound bombs. And so as a result of the various problems that he had, he said that in any situations where there was a disagreement over what had happened, the Enterprise's report should be trusted over what the Hornet wrote.
Yep, very true. Yep.
Yeah, I think people always point that out as a pretty damning statement to come from a commanding officer. If your commanding officer says trust the other guy's report and not yours, that's a pretty significant thing for somebody in that position to say. So, yeah, I think another thing that comes into play is that for so many of the people who may have been court-martialed, frankly, for their decisions after this ended up dying in this battle. They didn't survive, and because of that, I think a lot of people say it was easy to not really dwell on all of the some of the bad decisions that were made, and to give those people medals posthumously, unfortunately. Which if they had survived, they well may have actually had to stand court-martial for disobeying orders. So it's a tough thing. It was coming on the heels of what ended up being a huge victory for the U.S. It was a type of thing where probably not many people would have wanted to dwell too much on the one carrier where things did not go well, and tales of insubordination and bad navigation. A lot of that probably would have been lost somewhat in the victorious feeling after the battle. But it's of the three carriers, two of them definitely contributed heavily, and the Hornet just was not part of the winning plan that day.
And we do have Waldron's Navy Cross that was donated by his widow, actually, speaking of.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
You can, if you want, you can swing over to it real quick. It's in our Midway case.
Oh, yeah. No, I'd love to. Jared, I'm going to cut away from you real quick. Yeah, let's show that.
And so it came through, and so we have, as you can imagine, we have a little display at Midway at the museum with a couple of artifacts, including Thatch's logbook. We have a life vest that was worn by George Gay, not during the battle, but it was his. 80s map, the actual map is in there as well, and a few other things. So, but this is the Navy Cross that was awarded posthumously to Lieutenant Commander Waldron of VT8.
Oh, neat. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so you can see I'm got a pretty good formation with my southern force. The other one that I was on just a second ago, one of the weird things about this game is when you try to make a turn from a diagonal line to a straight line, or any sort of turn at all, the dispositions of the ships gets a little bit screwy, and so you typically have to spend another turn getting them back where you want them to be.
It's an artificial nature of having a hex grid like this. As you can see on the map, it's divided into hexes. So yeah, there's only 6 directions you can ever turn, and you're right that does make for some when you're trying to keep a formation, it can throw that out of whack a little bit sometimes.
All right, so if you were keeping track, you saw that I did manage to shoot down that PBY, and I did a little more damage to the Marauder. It looks like his B-17 flew off down here somewhere, I guess, looking for more targets of opportunity to spot. And you can kind of see my strategy for my submarines, this one down here is basically doing what I intended for them to do. This one up here is not. And I'm not going to go into too much more detail about what happened there, but those of you watching, no doubt saw it. And I'm kind of surprised these guys haven't been spotted yet. Maybe they're a little bit too far away. So they're probably not going to wind up doing what I thought they would do, and that's kind of a disappointment. But hopefully I can still get them close enough to at least have some role in the battle. And back to you, Rob.
Okay. Yeah, it's about 9:15. I'm when a complete turn is Jared moving and then myself moving. So how about if I'm going to take my turn here, and I think for tonight we'll call it there, and that'll bring us to the end of, I believe we're on turn 5, is it? So that'll be a good place to stop, I think, for tonight. I'm definitely. If you're worried, Jared, I'm glad, because I'm worried too, having the fact that we're getting into the middle of the game here, and I've still only found 2 of your carriers. So that is definitely cause for concern for me. I'm obviously focused on defending Midway itself as much as I can, but there still seems to be a lot more out there I have not found. So although I think, unless I've missed something, I don't think you've found any of my carriers yet. So at least maybe I have that going. Oh, yep, there goes the PBY. Down it goes. All right, well, destined not to last too much longer when it was surrounded by zeros, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. To me, this looks sort of like the bait group there. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I want to send everybody towards that or not, but one of those considerations the Japanese had in reality, and Jared, I don't know if you've thought this way too, is the fact that, if they had their entire fleet together, obviously it would have been quite a significant numerical advantage in terms of pure numbers of ships. But, their thought and their plan for the battle was trying to offer that nearest group, the group that would actually invade the island, as sort of the bait that would draw out the American carriers. And for their consideration, and Jared, maybe you want to talk some about this too, because I know you know quite a bit about the Japanese side, is the fact they wanted that bait group to look strong enough for the Americans to attack, but not so strong that they would just want to leave it alone, or not even come out to venture out thinking it was too dangerous. So that was kind of a fine line to walk for Japanese planners.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the overall strategic significance of Midway, there is sort of this underlying thought on the American side that even if the Japanese do capture Midway, they're not possibly going to be able to hold it because they don't have the logistical capability. And you see that problem in the islands they capture in the Aleutians, Attu and Kiska, which is, at Midway very far away, but also has a much more inhospitable environment. So there is kind of this attitude with Nimitz and his staff that, if they do capture Midway, you haven't lost everything yet. I mean, you can kind of get away with that. As far as what Rob was saying about whether to unite the force or divide the force, talking about the carriers specifically, because now Rob is saying that they're not all together. There is an advantage to keeping them in one place, concentration of force and being able to maximize the supportive screen. But I think, at least the way I would play it, is I would probably do more like what Mitra thought they were doing. Not put all your eggs in one basket, where if you find one of them, you find them all. You split them up. And in fact, I don't know if Rob looked at the specific ships, but you can see that the 2 carriers that he spotted, well, now actually I don't even remember which ones I think it was Akagi and Kaga. So they're operating as the first carrier division. Okay, and then and that makes sense because Akagi and Kaga were both the 2 slowest ships or the 2 slowest carriers that Nagumo had, 28 knots and I think 31 knots respectively. Whereas Soryu and Hiryu, which were 2 of the newer carriers, I had a top speed of I think 34.5 or 35 knots. So I would, and I didn't deploy them the way I would have historically because of the fact that I had to take the transports into account. But as far as having those pairings operating together. I think that's something similar to what I would have actually have done.
Ah. All right, I've got another significant sighting report here now for my B-17. Well, that helps. Oh, I see. Okay. All right, now the picture is developing a little bit more for me.
That'd be quite the cliffhanger, you know, leave them.
Yeah, no, right. No, it's a perfect cliffhanger moment. Tune in next time to find out what's in that unidentified Japanese force there. My B-26 is still just hanging on. Let's see here. All right. So kind of zooming out where we'll call it a night here in just a bit, but we'll zoom out just to show you kind of what the overall situation is. So over here on my side of the map, again, so here's Midway in the middle. Here's what we're fighting over. You see the three hexes that make up the island there, still flying the U.S. flag. So that's my main goal. I see we have a 0 parked right there. That's probably waiting to whack anything that tries to take off from Midway, the airstrip there. So looking east of Midway, you kind of see what's coming in over here. Scrolling to the bottom, we've got this group, and I'll just jump over here. So I just sighted this grouping of ships. I see, looks like I've found, let's see, I think that's a cruiser there. So looks like we've got some surface elements coming out. That's a transport in the back there. So I know I've got part of the invasion fleet that must be part of this grouping down here. And scrolling back up, this is kind of directly west of Midway. I don't have this group spotted anymore because my aircraft have flown off, but this is the one we were just talking about where we know the Kaga and Akagi are in here. So we know they're up here. I've not really spotted anything up on the northern end of the map. So I feel like I've probably missed something up there, but so far, no luck. So looking at, this is the end of turn 5. This has put us, we're well into June 6th at this point. So we're going to go ahead and call it here for a night. We are going to reconvene here a week from today, next Thursday, and we'll see how we do with pacing. We may very well be able to play out the rest of the battle. We'll see how we do. We may end up doing this even a third night. We're going to the plan is to kind of keep going every Thursday night until we finish this off. So whether we finish next week or the week after, we'll see. But I will say thank you very much again for everybody who was watching. Please feel free again, if you're watching this on replay, to comment in the feed. You can always come back and watch this on both our the Naval War College Museum's YouTube channel and Facebook. But I'll say to Jared, Guy, and Mark, thank you very much for joining us. We've got more. I know, Mark, I think you've got a few more things to show from your museum. I've got a few that I can show too, and I'll kind of save that maybe for next time when we get into what I think will be the start of the real fireworks. So we'll have some more to talk about then. But yeah, thanks very much. Any closing comments, guys, before we sign off here for tonight?
No, just thanks for having us, and everyone have a good night.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was pretty interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to hear your judgment on my plan here when this is all said and done. You've seen how it works out, but yeah, the jury is still out, hopefully, at this point.
Yep.
All right, everybody. Thanks very much, and we will see you again next Thursday, a week from today.
All right, take care,
everyone.
Take care.
Night, everybody.